Assalamu dudes! Welcome back to PLB Green. Today, something a little bit different. I'm going to be using some bonsai. Bonsai. They're just some ficus, microcarpa cuttings. There's a variegated ficus benjamina here. And what I'm going to be doing is using this acrylic box, which I found. We're going to be building a little landscape, a little mountainscape. When I say that, I've got all these rocks here and they're really textured. These are all collected rocks that I've collected myself. If you are collecting rocks, make sure you're not collecting them from a national park because that is illegal. These did not come from a national park. I always make sure I double check an area to make sure it isn't illegal to collect from. So I collected these and they're all different sizes, all the way from a very, very little small, all the way up to this big chungus. So, I don't know which ones I'm going to be using, but I'm going to build up a little hardscape in here, siliconing the rocks in with aquarium silicone. And then the idea is behind it, and then the roots growing down into the water, I'm going to have a little body of water down here. But the idea is for the figs to look like they're dotted throughout this mountainscape, which goes down into a little body of water where I might put some simple floating plants and stuff like that. Should be a lot of fun. I always enjoy making these little penging kind of landscapes. And I've never done one with a clear pot or a clear container, so it should be interesting. So the first thing is to get started on the hardscape. So far, I have siliconed all the rocks in place, and I've given it 24 hours to dry. In the little gaps here, before the silicone dried, I dropped in some little stones just to try and cover the silicone. I can do a lot more of that if I haven't done it properly. I can add more with super glue, but the next step is going to be tipping the whole container upside down, shaking off all of those excess stones. You can see that the rocks that are siliconed in aren't moving anywhere, and that's because the silicone actually works. Now we know exactly what is stuck down and what's not, and even though you can see like little bits of silicone here and there, once we finish the planting and fill in the rest, you won't see those at all. But so far so good for this tiny little bonsai scape. For this next step, if I turn it around, you'll see that there is a large gap in behind the hardscape. Did that on purpose, obviously, so I could put in the bonsai soil and have a place to plant the bonsais. However, there is going to be an inch or so of water in the bottom of this at all times. And I know that ficus and figs do like water, but I don't want their roots sitting in the water at all times. Just in case they're not a fan of being fully submerged 24 hours a day, I'm going to put in a thin layer of this black scoria, which is kind of just a small volcanic stone, little bits like this. And I'm just going to drop them in. And as I said, the water's probably going to be about an inch deep. So I don't want to take up too much space. Otherwise, the plants or the bonsais won't have enough soil to, root in. I'm not just putting those fig bonsais in, or those ficus bonsais in. I'm also going to be putting in some small ferns and things like that to try and build up the landscape. So I'm going to be putting in some accent plants, the ferns and the bird's nest ferns. They'll all be accent plants. So at the moment, let's just have a look. It's looking pretty good. I really want to fill the space though. I don't want there to be anywhere where there's roots getting stuck down in the water. So looking at the front of the scape, now obviously we need some sort of substrate at the bottom down here. So just like some of the small pebbles that I've glued up in these silicone gaps, I'm just using an aquarium gravel. The reason I chose this gravel, it has some similar tones and shades to the rocks in the actual scape, which makes it more believable in terms of a consistent landscape. So when you're looking at a landscape, you can see a consistency, at least a minor one, between the smaller rocks and the larger rocks and then the huge rocks. That's because the smaller rocks break off the giant rocks. So what I'm doing is I'm putting a very, very thin layer of this substrate down, and I'm just covering the bottom so I can't see down through. And as I said, there is going to be water in this section, but I don't want to build this up so it's a really thick layer from the front. So, and what you can actually do is stack the substrate higher towards the back, like I'm doing now. And what that does is it just kind of gives a bit more depth in the scape, or the scale of the scape. I want to blend the mountainscape, the larger rocks in the mountainscape, down to the finer gravel at the bottom. I can start putting in some medium to small sized rocks like this at the front and at the sides to give more depth to the scape, but also to show that the rocks are breaking away down into smaller rocks. And you don't want any symmetry or you don't want any symmetry or pattern to this. You just want to kind of drop them and lay them down like they've broken off the cliff face and just fallen down like that. Now, because I have this kind of drainage layer down here, I want to block it off so when I put the bonsai soil in, it doesn't fall down in between these rocks and kind of mix together and blur the lines between substrate layer and drainage layer. And then I'm going to try my best to tuck it in and just create a barrier of sorts between that bottom drainage layer and the substrate layer. So that's pretty good. I know it comes up on the sides here, but you might be looking at this from the back, so that's all right. So now that I've got that layer in, I can start thinking about my bonsais. I think this straight away, if you look at the scale between this tree and this planting, even if we cut it back to the first cutting, I just think there's not enough shape or taper, considering its really large size in comparison to the scape. So we'll just get rid of that one straight away. With this one, it's very bushy, this microcarpa here, and it's small enough, but it's got a double trunk. It's possible I could also use these three. The foliage is up really high on these. And they are quite tall for the scape, but that might look pretty cool with like 3 epic kind of really tall trees at the top. And then ferns and shrubbery down below. Put them back here, gives you a bit more perspective. That could look pretty cool. It almost looks like a mangrove. So that's an idea. Whoa, look at these aerial roots, dude. Step on pulling these guys out. I think they'll come out as a, oh, what a surprise. They came out as a clump of 3. So let's start by just raking out from the bottom of the trunks in a radial pattern around all 3. Try not to break too many of these aerial roots, just because we might be using them in the scape. We might be trailing them down the mountainside. So that looks pretty cool. So I might be able to separate them by hand. Yeah, oh, that's quite a nice little root base, actually. Oh, it's quite buttressed too. That's very nice. That could look cool. And these two. Oh, they came apart quite easily. Whoa, look at this guy. That's a thick root. Look at that. Boosh. We can definitely reduce some of this giant bulbous taproot. But, you know, something to work with. And number 3, look at those aerial roots. They're beautiful. Oh, there's the drainage screen on the bottom. I'm just using my hands. Ooh, again. Big buttress, kind of thick root coming down. We'll definitely be able to cut some of that back. All right, let's get these cleaned up and have a close look at them. In terms of root base of the 3, if you look at them, this one's really bulbous. This one's pretty bulbous. This one's quite nice. It's quite buttress and the root base is very flat. So I think this is going to be, we might be doing some root over rock, but I think this one's roots will be the main attraction. And again, once these trees get established in the setup, we should be able to cut them right back. For hopefully some new shoots will come out much lower. But if we cut them right down, they'll probably put out foliage and they'll look a lot more miniature. But I think that one's going to be definitely a feature with that really flat root base. These 2 bulbous ones, I'm going to reduce the bulb because no one likes a bulbous root base. Come on, man. This one here, let's take that leaf off. It's got insect damage. You can see it has this really spindly kind of trunk that comes down, and then there's this big fat chungus. So just before the chungus starts to get thinner again, if I cut here, I think there's enough roots above that cut point to allow the tree to survive. And ficus are pretty resilient. They're tricky bonsais to manage because they get a lot of buttress roots. But they're quite resilient, and I think that, and now look, the root, he sits flat and he's got these beautiful aerial roots. I'm not going to cut these short yet because I don't know where they're going to trail yet. So I'll put that guy there. I'm going to do nothing to this one's root base. And you'll see the white sap kind of leaking out. That's that sticky sap that a lot of people are allergic to. This one here, let's take it off just below there. So getting rid of those huge bulbous roots and still keeping a lot of roots on, so the tree's going to survive. So those are our 3. We're going to start by putting a thin base layer of soil on top of the drainage screen. Carefully, just like this. Not too much, because we want room to plant these ficus in. So now we have a base layer of soil. We can spin around to the front. We can start thinking about the placement of the trees. So I did want this one to be my main feature. I'm not sure if I should tuck it down. Interesting. If I pull half its root base down the back and into the soil, I should be able to trail the rest of the root base down down the mountain and into the water, which might look pretty cool. Very interesting indeed. I have decided to glue this feature tree here and have half its roots coming over the back and into the soil, and the other half of its roots trailing down the mountain and perhaps touching the water down here. So first things first, I'm going to come underneath and I am going to prune off this thick root here. So this super glue shouldn't hurt your trees at all when you're doing these mini scapes. Yeah, now that I've removed that root, I can tuck that tree down and further. So here we go. I'm going to put some super glue here, and I'm going to be quite liberal. And then initially I'm going to try and wedge this tree down. And because the roots of the tree are a little bit damp, the wetness actually triggers the super glue to dry harder. So I'm just applying pressure on the contact points, hold it there for a little while, and all these roots sticking up, I can trail down later. I just want to get that initial bond on the rock face. Now come around the back, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tuck, as I said, tuck down the back half of this tree's roots so they will be buried in soil. Just like that. As much as I can. Turn it around to the front. I'm going to tuck that root down there, and if you can find gaps in between the rocks, you can usually wedge the roots in. Oh, that one there looks good, trailing down over the top there. And if you really want to secure them in place, the roots, after you make a decision, you just put a tiny drop of super glue on one of the contact points. I like that root drooping down, so there's a contact point there. So you want to make it look like the tree's been growing here for ages. So I just pulled that root, even though it's not radial, but it does look like it might be. It does make the tree look more secure. So I look for the contact point, drop of super glue. So you want to kind of like wrap, as much as you can, wrap the roots around the landscape without breaking them, just poking and prodding. That one there looks good. This one here. Now I want this one to come over the top here, so I'm going to put a dab of glue there, dab of glue here, and one right on the end. Hold it down for just a second. Yes. This root here, I think, can trail up onto the rock face. And we have 1, 2. You don't need much glue at all. Quite happy with that. That's the first tree. Don't forget, the second half of its roots are coming off the back here and into this soil here. Now, we have the rule of three, the next tree, which is the one with the biggest, the fattest, most buttress root base, but a lot of aerial roots. So we can put this guy, I'm thinking here. I'm thinking like, I think even though he's got lots of aerial roots, they're really long, so I'm going to stretch them over as many as I can over the rocks. But I think I want to bury this one down in the soil. So just leaning back there for now. And the third one, again with all the aerial roots, this one I might wrap around this side. Tucking around here, so some aerial roots trail out on this side of the planting. I think the next step will be to put some soil in, secure those second and third trees in their spots, and then finish off with some gluing. So a bit of soil, using a tool to fill all of the air gaps in. Yeah, in the meantime, I was filling in the soil behind the initial tree. Got this last one, let's have a look. It's pretty cool. And this last guy, I'm gonna lift up. I might take that aerial root off. Fill in the soil, making a big old mess. Half the reason I do bonsais, to be honest, to make a mess. Okay, and I'm leaving a bit of a gap because I know I'm going to be putting moss down. Ooh. Okay. Okay. I'm kind of liking it, to be honest. It's kind of sick. All right, let's do some more of this root placement. So, where do we have roots? We got that big guy. Gluing the contact point, just the tiniest dab. Because these roots will grow on and stick to the rocks anyway, permanently. So you don't actually need much glue at all, just the tiniest bit. Oh, that's right. Let's pull this one around the back here. Tuck it in there and wrap it around. So contact point there. Contact point here, here, and that should do it. I really like this kind of, oh yeah, that looks good. Contact point, contact point. It's starting to look really rugged and cool. For the accent plants, I've got a range of little ferns. I've got rabbit's foot fern over here, some various other types of ferns, some baby tears, some small bird's nest ferns. These will get much, much bigger, so they'll only go into this scape temporarily. Just some garden moss, which I picked off my garden, and of course some Java moss. And there's a little, on this Java moss is a little bit of duckweed attached here, which will float and populate the top of the water. Starting with the biggest accent plants, we will put this fern back here like this. this fern has a bit of Java moss on it. Turn it around. Got these long planting tweezers. Make a small indentation in the soil here. Pick off any leaves that have imperfections and put it in. Making sure the roots are nice and safe in the soil there. Now I have more of that fern. I'm not sure if I need it. I think I will use it. Not yet though. Now I don't want to overdo it either. I tend to overdo it initially, but I can always take things out later if I change my mind. So that's fine as well. Let's start on some of these bird's nest ferns. The cool thing about these bird's nest ferns is you can wedge them in between rocks. They can be partially submerged in water. The only downfall is they do tend to outgrow these smaller bonsai setups because they begin to turn into insanely huge bird's nest ferns, which isn't helpful. How about down here? As I said, it doesn't matter if these bird's nest ferns become slightly submerged in water. They do like water a lot. They're a rainforest fern. Too bad. Let's try another fern back here. And with these ferns, you can even add a little spot of super glue. I think that is kind of cool. I'm putting my baby tears in next. Baby tears are great. As long as they have moisture, they're such a good terrarium plant. And they're really easy to trim. And they're super tight. They have super tiny leaves, which make them, add a bit of moss back here, which make them give a great scale to these sorts of setups. Whoa, whoa, looking kind of cool, I think we need something big over here. So let's do two things. Let's put in this here in front of this tree. And then this larger one, we will put in back here. And then I'm going to cap it off back here with a bit of moss, making sure that I press the moss down quite securely into the substrate, otherwise it will dry out very, very quickly. So I'm just coming around the back here, putting in these little wedges of moss, which not only protect the roots of these ferns, but just more garden moss or just moss in general finishes off a build perfectly. I might even wedge a little bit of moss down behind here. If you get moss from the sidewalk or your garden, it usually has a bit of debris attached to the bottom of it. And the debris attached to the moss is super useful when it comes to pushing it into tight places and securing things down. Whoa, look extreme! Now, do I want to put the bird's nest fern in? Maybe it'll be too intense. Maybe it will be too intense. Nah. Always overdo it to begin with. These accent plants will die back anyway when they're acclimating. So I'm always going to overdo it at the beginning. I can always take them back later. Now let's finish off any exposed soil or even rock faces, like the top of the rocks. You can press, if the moss has a little layer of soil on the bottom, you can push it down. And as long as you're spraying it regularly, like on a couple of times a day, with dechlorinated water, the moss will flourish. I'm gonna put some moss down in here. See what I mean when I say if it has a bit of the soil on the back, it kind of creates a clay-like effect, and you can push it in to crevices and things like that. It's really helpful stuff. Put some down here. Some more here. And now I have the Java moss. The Java moss, I'm just going to, with the duckweed, place down in the water's edge. And when I fill it up with water, those duckweed pieces should float and the Java should float around and secure in a spot. Okay, it's looking intense, but I love it. I might get a little bit more moss to come up the side here, but then I think we're done. We can fill it up with water.